Imagine this. A dictator so evil that he plunged the entire world into war. A man responsible for the deaths of over 70 million people. Now imagine that this man could have been stopped. Not once, not twice, but over 40 times. But every time, something went wrong. This is not just the story of Adolf Hitler. This is the story of those who dared to kill him, the men and women who risked everything to stop the greatest monster of the 20th century, and failed. But why did they fail? What went wrong? And what if they had succeeded? Tonight, we dive deep into the 42 known assassination attempts on Adolf Hitler, a story of courage, betrayal, paranoia, and fate. You rewatching the man who tried to kill Hitler 42 times, but failed every time. Chapter 1. The iron grip of a dictator. By the late 1930s, Adolf Hitler was no longer just a political leader. He had become the unchallenged dictator of Germany. His rise to power was swift, ruthless, and orchestrated with cunning precision. After being appointed Chancellor in 1933, Hitler quickly moved to consolidate power, transforming Germany's fragile democracy into a totalitarian regime under the Nazi Party. How did he achieve this iron grip? Firstly, Hitler masterfully used propaganda and fear. Joseph Goebbels, his Minister of Propaganda, flooded German society with Nazi ideology, glorifying the Führer as the savior of the nation. Newspapers, radio broadcasts, films, and mass rallies painted Hitler as a near-mythical figure destined to restore Germany's former glory after the humiliation of World War I and the Treaty of Versailles. But propaganda alone was not enough. Behind the scenes, Hitler created an extensive and brutal security apparatus designed to eliminate all opposition. The SS under Heinrich Himmler became the regime's most feared instrument. A secret police force that tracked, arrested, and often executed anyone deemed a threat. The Gestapo, the official secret police, operated with near unlimited power, creating a climate of terror where suspicion and betrayal lurked around every corner. Hitler's paranoia only grew as he entrenched his position. He surrounded himself with layers of protection, not just physical, but psychological. He had bodyguards from the SS constantly near him, food tasters to prevent poisoning, and elaborate security protocols to guard against assassination attempts. His schedule was unpredictable, his whereabouts kept secret even from most of his closest associates. Decoy convoys and body doubles added to the confusion. Moreover, Hitler isolated himself from dissenting voices. His inner circle consisted of loyalists who praised him relentlessly, reinforcing his sense of invincibility. Anyone who dared question his decisions faced swift and brutal consequences: exile, imprisonment, or death. The notorious Night of the Long Knives in 1934 was a chilling example. Hitler personally ordered the purge of his own party members and potential rivals, killing hundreds to secure his dominance. This environment of absolute control and fear made it almost impossible for anyone within Germany to openly oppose Hitler. The average German citizen was either a supporter, complicit through silence, or too terrified to resist. The Nazis had effectively crushed political opposition, outlawed unions, and dismantled the free press. Yet, in the shadows, beneath this iron grip, resistance was quietly growing. Disillusioned soldiers, civil servants, clergy, and ordinary citizens began plotting to end Hitler's reign. They understood the catastrophic path Germany was on. With concentration camps expanding, civil liberties vanishing, and war looming on the horizon. But acting on these thoughts was a dangerous game. To move against Hitler was to invite certain death, not just for oneself, but for one's family. The regime's pervasive surveillance and ruthless reprisals made any form of resistance a high-stakes gamble, and so, For every whisper of rebellion, there was a crushing response from the state. This chapter of history is crucial to understanding why assassination attempts against Hitler faced such overwhelming odds. The dictator's grip wasn't just political. It was psychological, social, and physical. Any would-be assassin wasn't just fighting a man, they were fighting a fortress. Chapter 2. The first plots. Early attempts. The earliest assassination attempts on Adolf Hitler were acts of individual defiance. Bold, idealistic, and tragically doomed, these efforts weren't part of any grand conspiracy. They were the desperate actions of men who saw the storm coming long before the world did. In 1938, Maurice Bavot, a 22-year-old theology student from Switzerland, made his way to Germany with a pistol hidden in his coat. Influenced by anti-Nazi Catholic movements, and convinced that Hitler's death would save Europe from ruin, Bavot planned to shoot the Fuhrer during an annual parade in Munich. The plan was simple. Get close and pull the trigger, and Bavot did get close. Multiple times. In fact, he stood in the crowd as Hitler passed by, but fate, or perhaps just bad luck, always intervened. At one event, Hitler unexpectedly changed his route. At another, Nazi party officials blocked Bavot's view. With his chance slipping through his fingers, Bavot abandoned the mission and tried to escape back to Switzerland. He was caught by chance while riding a train without a ticket. During interrogation, his gun was discovered, and he confessed. The Nazis executed him in 1941. Then came Johann Georg Elsar. Elsar was not a student or ideologue. He was a carpenter from Württemberg, quiet, unassuming, but deeply opposed to Nazism. Unlike Bavot, Elsar acted entirely alone. He spent months preparing an audacious plan to blow up Hitler during a speech at the Burgerbrucker beer hall in Munich. The very hall where Hitler had launched his failed coup attempt in 1923. Every evening, for over a month, Elsar slipped into the beer hall after hours, hiding in a storeroom. He hollowed out a column behind the speaker's podium and installed a time bomb made with stolen dynamite. His calculations were precise. The bomb would detonate at the exact moment Hitler was expected to speak. On November 8, 1939, the plan went into motion. Hitler, however, left early that evening. Bad weather had forced him to change his travel schedule. Instead of taking the train, he left by car 13 minutes before the bomb exploded. The blast was devastating. It destroyed the podium and killed 8 people. Had Hitler lingered, he would have been blown to pieces. Elsar was arrested that same night while trying to cross into Switzerland. Authorities found incriminating evidence on him, and he confessed. He was imprisoned in Sachsenhausen and later Dachau, where he was kept alive, possibly to be used in a show trial. Just weeks before the war ended, Elsar was executed on Hitler's orders. These early plots, Bovar's quiet pursuit, Elsar's meticulous sabotage, revealed something critical. Hitler was vulnerable. Despite all the layers of security, despite the propaganda mythos, he was not invincible. Perchance, timing, weather, crowds always seemed to be on his side. Was it coincidence? Or was Hitler, as many in Germany began to believe, protected by fate? These failures helped feed the cult of invincibility surrounding him, making future plots even more daunting. But they also inspired others. And soon, resistance would evolve from lone wolves into organized conspiracies. With powerful men inside Hitler's own army. Chapter 3. Inside the Wolf's Lair. The army turns against Hitler. By the early 1940s, as the Second World War escalated and German losses mounted on the Eastern Front, cracks began to show in the Nazi war machine. Some of Hitler's most trusted generals and high-ranking officers started to question not only his military judgment, but his sanity. Among them, a conspiracy began to take shape, one that would culminate in the most infamous assassination attempt of them all, the July 20th plot. The plot wasn't driven by ideology alone. Many of the conspirators were conservative nationalists who had once supported Hitler or at least tolerated him as a bulwark against communism, but as they witnessed his increasingly irrational decisions, such as insisting on holding positions at all costs or refusing tactical retreats, their faith turned to dread. The bloodshed of the Eastern Front, the horrors of the Holocaust, and the realization that Hitler was leading Germany toward total destruction became too much to bear. The German resistance within the military began to coalesce under the leadership of figures like General Ludwig Beck, Colonel Hans Oster, and eventually a charismatic and battle-hardened officer, Claus von Stauffenberg. Stauffenberg was not your typical conspirator. A devout Catholic and decorated war hero, he had been severely injured in North Africa, losing an eye, his right hand, and 2 fingers on his left. Despite his injuries, he remained a sharp thinker and a natural leader, and he became convinced that the only way to save Germany and Europe was to kill Hitler. The opportunity came through Operation Valkyrie. Operation Valkyrie was originally a contingency plan designed by the German army to maintain order in the event of internal unrest, such as an uprising by forced laborers, or the SS. Stauffenberg and his allies planned to hijack this plan. Once Hitler was dead, the conspirators would mobilize reserve army units across Germany to seize control of Berlin, disarm the SS, and arrest top Nazi officials. On July 20th, 1944, Stauffenberg attended a meeting with Hitler at the Wolfes Lair, Hitler's military headquarters in East Prussia. He carried a briefcase containing a powerful bomb. Just before the meeting, he managed to arm it and place it under the table near Hitler. Then he left the room. The bomb exploded. Chaos erupted. Several people were killed, but Hitler survived, miraculously shielded by the heavy oak conference table and the briefcase, having been moved slightly by another officer. Back in Berlin, confusion reigned. The plotters initially believed Hitler was dead and began to execute the Valkyrie plan. But once word spread that Hitler had survived, the momentum collapsed. Loyal officers turned against the conspirators. Stauffenberg and several others were arrested and executed that same night. Over the following weeks, Hitler unleashed brutal retribution. Nearly 5,000 people were arrested, and many were tortured and hanged, including some of Germany's most senior military leaders. The resistance had tried to cut off the head of the snake, but it missed. The July 20th plot was the closest anyone came to killing Hitler. It proved that even those within his inner military circles had lost faith. But it also revealed the immense risks and challenges of trying to overthrow a dictator whose grip was not just political, but deeply embedded in the fabric of a terrified nation. And Hitler, once again, emerged alive, bloodied but defiant. His paranoia deepened, his purges intensified, and yet, incredibly, more attempts would follow. Chapter 4: A Web of Plots. The Final Years of Resistance. In the final years of World War II, Germany was a crumbling empire ruled by fear, fantasy, and fanaticism. Allied forces were advancing from all sides. Cities lay in ruins, and Hitler, once the master of Europe, had become a paranoid shadow, lashing out from the depths of his fortified bunkers. And yet, even as the Nazi regime tightened its grip on the dying German war machine, resistance continued. A web of desperate, last-ditch plots to bring the tyrant down. These were not the bold, large-scale conspiracies of generals like these were quieter, often chaotic plans. More scattered, more dangerous, and more unhinged. But they shared one goal: kill Adolf Hitler before he took Germany, and the world down with him. The poison bottle and the doomed flight, one of the most daring plots, came from within Hitler's own military. In early 1944, a group of Opfer agents, Germany's military intelligence service, devised a clever plan: sabotage Hitler's personal plane. The conspirators concealed a bomb inside a liquor bottle, disguised as a popular French liqueur. The bottle was placed aboard Hitler's Condor aircraft. The detonator, timed to explode mid-air, failed. Some say the cold temperature in the unheated cargo hold dissevered the mechanism. Others suggest sabotage or simple bad luck. Once again, Hitler survived, never realizing how close he came to falling from the sky. The bottle bomb was retrieved before anyone could trace it back to the plotters. But the message was clear. Even the air wasn't safe. The officer who couldn't pull the trigger, there was another plan. This time involving a German army officer assigned to one of Hitler's daily military briefings at the Berghof, his mountain retreat in Bavaria. The officer, a part of the extended July 20th resistance circle, smuggled a small pistol under his uniform. He was close enough to Hitler to shoot him in the head and end it all in an instant. But when the moment came, he froze. The room was filled with high-ranking SS officers. The fear of failure and of the brutal reprisals that would follow overwhelmed him. He left the meeting in silence. Still armed, still alive. Another chance. Gone. Allies versus Hitler. A paradox of purpose. Interestingly, not all the pressure to kill Hitler came from within Germany. By 1944, the British and American intelligence services had both drawn up plans to assassinate the British SOE, tasked with sabotage and subversion, considered sniping Hitler during one of his routine walks at the Berghof. They knew the path he took. They knew when he strolled, alone or with his dog, staring out over the Bavarian Alps. A sniper team could have done it. The plan was ready, but then they cancelled it. Why? Because the Allies had come to a strange conclusion. Hitler was now their greatest weapon. His leadership had become erratic, delusional. He refused to listen to his generals. He ordered suicidal. He diverted resources to phantom armies. Killing him, they feared, might bring someone more competent to power, someone who could prolong the war or negotiate peace on better terms for Germany. So the trigger was never pulled. Final whispers in the bunker as Berlin collapsed under Allied bombs and Soviet artillery. Hitler withdrew to his final refuge, the Four Bunker, an underground maze beneath the Reich. There, in the concrete belly of a dying empire, he held desperate meetings, issued impossible orders, and dictated his twisted political testament. Yet even here, in this fortress of paranoia, there were whispers of betrayal. Some reports suggest that a small group of SS officers and aides considered poisoning Hitler's food or medicine, a final effort to stop the madness. But trust was almost non-existent. Hitler had food tasters. He rarely slept. Every moment was wrapped in fear and suspicion. No one could get close enough. No one dared. The conspiracy collapsed before it began. The end that wasn't an assassination. And then, finally, on April 30th, 1945, Adolf Hitler ended his own life. Not by bomb, not by bullet from a patriot or spy, but by his own hand. In the bunker beside his new wife, Eva Braun, he swallowed cyanide and shot himself in the head. His body was burned by aides in the garden above, as Soviet shells rained down on Berlin for the men and women who had tried to kill him. Some dead, some in hiding, some still in prison. There was no satisfaction, only silence. The dictator had died. Yes, but on his own terms. He had denied them justice. He had denied them victory, a legacy of resistance and regret in the end. 42 known assassination attempts failed to kill Adolf Hitler. Some were bold, some were subtle. Some came within minutes. Others never got past the planning stage. But all of them, every single one, was a cry against tyranny. These plots didn't just seek to end a life, they sought to change history. And yet, they failed. Why? Because a combination of fear, luck, timing, and ironclad control kept Hitler alive. Because conspirators hesitated. Because detonators misfired. Because history, cruelly, is not always just, but their failure doesn't make them cowards. It makes them human. Chapter 5. Fate, Failure, and the Fragile Thread of History. On April 30th, Adolf Hitler took his own life in the Vorbunker, beneath the ruins of Berlin, surrounded by concrete walls, dwindling supplies, and the eerie sound of Soviet artillery echoing in the distance. The man who had terrorized a continent chose to escape justice with a bullet to the head. His death was not at the hands of an assassin or a hero, but of his own cowardice. But what if things had been different? What if even one of those 42 assassination attempts had succeeded? This question haunts historians and dreamers alike. Not just because of the tragedy that followed Hitler's survival, but because of how close his death had come so many times. Each failed attempt was not just a missed opportunity. It was a fork in the road of history. If Maurice Bavot had squeezed the trigger, if Johann Georg Elsar's bomb had exploded just 13 minutes earlier, if Claus von Stauffenberg's briefcase had been nudged behind the leg of a thick oak table, what could have been saved? Tens of millions of lives. Jewish families in Poland, Soviet soldiers on the Eastern Front, civilians bombed in London and Dresden. Entire cities, Warsaw, Rotterdam, Leningrad, might have been spared. The Holocaust, perhaps, could have been stopped before it reached its industrial scale. Even Germany's own fate might have changed. Instead of ending in rubble and division, it might have found a path to redemption through the brave actions of its own people. Perhaps the war would have ended years earlier. Perhaps the Cold War map of Europe would look very different today. But that is not the world we inherited. What we inherited was built on the back of failure. 42 of them. Each attempt showed immense courage. Ordinary men and women, soldiers and spies, priests and politicians, willing to sacrifice their lives to stop evil. They saw through the myth. They challenged the fear. They stood alone in front of the most dangerous man in the world and said, "Enough." And yet, every time, Hitler survived. Why? Some blamed bad luck. Others said Hitler was protected by fate, by destiny. There were even whispers that he had supernatural protection, that he couldn't be killed because history had chosen him. But the truth is more grounded and more tragic. Hitler survived because he was careful, paranoid. He surrounded himself with multiple layers of security, changed plans at the last minute, and fostered a culture of fear where even whispers of dissent could be fatal. He thrived in an environment where the cost of rebellion was not just death, but annihilation of entire families. He also survived because of human weakness. Because some couldn't bring themselves to kill. Because some hesitated. Because others betrayed the plans. And because in war, as in life, timing is everything. In the end, it was not the resistance that killed Hitler, but his own delusion. When faced with defeat, he turned the gun on himself, taking the coward's way out. Yet, while the assassins failed to kill the man, they did succeed in something else. They shattered the myth of invincibility. They proved that even at the height of tyranny, there were those who resisted. They left behind a legacy of moral courage in a time of monstrous evil. Today, we remember them, not for their failure, but for their attempt. Because in a world where so many stayed silent, they chose to act. Adolf Hitler died in a bunker, not on a battlefield, not in a courtroom, but in fear, hunted by the world. He set on fire. The people who tried to kill him were not perfect. Some were driven by revenge, others by duty. Some were dreamers, some pragmatists, but all of them, in their own way, stood for a simple truth: that evil must be confronted, even when the odds are impossible. And perhaps that's what truly matters. In the end, Hitler died, but their courage lived on. Chapter 6. Why he survived. The anatomy of failure. By the end of World War II, more than 42 assassination attempts on Adolf Hitler had failed. Some fizzled out before they began, others came within inches, or seconds, of changing world history. And yet, the dictator lived long enough to drag Germany into ruin, to orchestrate genocide on an industrial scale, and to leave behind a legacy of death and despair unmatched in the modern era. How? Why? Despite so many efforts by so many determined individuals, did no one succeed? The answer is complex. It lies not in one single reason, but in the intersection of chance, paranoia, human error, and an almost mythic narrative that seemed to follow Hitler throughout his reign. 1. A fortress of fear. Hitler's personal security. From the earliest days of his rise, Hitler surrounded himself with walls, both physical and psychological. He employed multiple layers of protection. The Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler, an elite bodyguard unit, shadowed him constantly. The Reichssicherheits meticulously inspected venues days in advance of his arrival. Food tasters sampled every meal. His travel routes were changed at the last minute. He was rarely seen in public without a heavy guard, and even then, never on predictable schedules. His speeches, once open to the public, became increasingly restricted. Even his inner circle didn't always know where he would be from one day to the next. And then there were the decoys, lookalikes used for appearances, the use of multiple train convoys, underground bunkers, constant surveillance of the military and civilian population through the Gestapo. The more powerful he became, the more paranoid he grew. And paradoxically, the more paranoid he grew, the more impenetrable his personal security became. 2. The role of chance, or destiny. Time and again, assassination attempts failed by mere minutes. A bomb didn't detonate. A meeting ended early. A route was changed. A bullet misfired. A heart lost nerve. Was it luck? One cannot overlook the statistical improbability of his survival. In November 1939, Hitler left a beer hall 13 minutes before a bomb detonated. In 1943, a bomb disguised as cognac on his plane failed to explode because the detonator froze. In 1944, a briefcase bomb was moved behind a thick table leg, shielding him from the blast. Each of these near-deaths reads like a moment stolen from fate. And too many Germans at the time, and some in his inner circle, this began to feel like divine protection, a kind of mystical shield. Even those who hated him began to believe that killing Hitler might be impossible. This belief, in turn, weakened resistance morale. If fate itself protected the Führer, what could mere men do? 3. Fractured resistance. No united front, contrary to popular belief. There was no single, unified German resistance. Instead, there were fragments. Noble officers, Catholic dissidents, communist agents, foreign-backed saboteurs, and even disillusioned Nazis. Each group had its own motives, methods, and limits. Some wanted democracy, others a different dictatorship. Their lack of coordination was fatal. Time and again, efforts collapsed under the weight of miscommunication. Valuable intelligence wasn't shared. Rivalries emerged. Trust eroded. Some plots were betrayed from within before they could even begin. Moreover, many high-ranking conspirators waited for the perfect moment, a hesitation that often cost them the only window they had. 4. The cult of personality. Hitler, as the state Hitler, wasn't just a leader. He had become the embodiment of Germany itself. Through relentless propaganda, he was portrayed as the messiah of a reborn nation. A man who had restored pride, defeated enemies, and created jobs. This image made it morally difficult for many, even his critics, to imagine assassinating him. To kill Hitler wasn't just to remove a man. It was to decapitate a movement, a regime, a vision, however twisted. And for many Germans, even those horrified by war, that was a step too far. 5. Fear, reprisal, and the cost of failure in Nazi Germany. Resistance wasn't just dangerous. It was suicidal. Every attempt, real or suspected, was met with savage punishment. Entire families were imprisoned, tortured, or executed under the doctrine of Sippenhaft family guilt. Friends disappeared overnight. Children were orphaned. Names were erased. Even discussing Hitler's death was enough to get you killed. And so, silence became survival. And survival became complicity. Many who wanted to act simply didn't, not because they lacked courage, but because the regime had made the cost of action absolute. 6. The illusion of control. Hitler's own behavior, ironically. Hitler himself contributed to his survival through sheer unpredictability. He changed plans on a whim. He cancelled appearances last minute. He distrusted telephones and radios. He preferred face-to-face meetings in remote locations, often heavily guarded. His erratic nature made it impossible to plan anything with certainty. In many cases, the only man who knew where Hitler would be was Hitler himself. 7. The final irony. When the Allies stepped back by late 1944, the tide had turned. The Allies were closing in from both sides. And with each new military failure, Hitler became more irrational, more isolated, more prone to catastrophic errors. To the Allies, this was useful. Churchill and Roosevelt began to fear what would happen if Hitler was killed. A power vacuum might emerge. A smarter Nazi successor might make peace, or worse, prolong the war. And so, quietly, the idea of killing Hitler lost its appeal. It was better, they reasoned, to let him destroy himself, and take the Nazi regime with him. The man who had once seemed too dangerous to live was now too dangerous to kill. Conclusion. The shadow of missed chances in the end. Hitler did die. Not by bullet, not by bomb, not by any heroic act of resistance. He took his own life deep beneath the ruins of Berlin. Alone, paranoid, defeated, but the world would never forget how close we came again and again to a very different history. A history where millions might have been saved, a war shortened, a genocide averted. But that's the cruel paradox of history. Sometimes the most evil men survive, not because they are strong, but because the world isn't ready to stop them. Chapter 7. What if? Alternate histories explored. History is shaped not just by what did happen, but by what could have happened, and few questions loom larger than this. What if Hitler had been assassinated? It's a haunting question, one that has kept historians, politicians, and philosophers awake at night, because each of the 42 failed assassination attempts wasn't just a moment of courage. It was a fork in the road of human history, and at each fork, the world might have taken a very different path. Let's explore those alternate types. Scenario 1. Elsar's bomb succeeds in 1939. Suppose the bomb planted by Johann Georg Elsar at the Berger Brückler beer hall in Munich had killed Hitler as intended. Just weeks after World War II had begun with Germany's invasion of Poland. At that time, Hitler's grip on power was still solid, but not yet absolute. Many generals, including some in the Wehrmacht High Command, were wary of his aggressive plans. If Hitler had died, then it's plausible that conservative elements within the military might have seized power, halted further invasions, and possibly negotiate a peace with Britain and France. The war, as we know it, might have ended before it truly began. Millions of lives, both military and civilian, could have been spared. But the flip side is chilling. Without Hitler's fanaticism, the Nazi regime might have survived longer under a less erratic, more calculated leader. Someone like Hermann Göring or Heinrich Himmler. The Holocaust, already in its planning stages, might still have proceeded, just more efficiently and in greater secrecy. Would the world have looked the other way in a cold, quiet Nazi Europe? Scenario 2. The July 20th plot succeeds in 1944. Now imagine a different timeline. One where Claus von Stauffenberg's bomb in the Wolf's lair does kill Hitler. It's July 1944. The Allies have landed in Normandy. The Soviet Union is pushing in from the east. Germany is bleeding on every front. With Hitler dead, Operation Valkyrie would have gone into full effect. The conspirators planned to arrest or kill key SS and Nazi officials, dismantle the totalitarian regime, and open peace negotiations with the Allies. But would the Allies have accepted a ceasefire? Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin had already committed to unconditional surrender. The Holocaust was in full swing, and memories of Nazi atrocities were piling up. It is possible that peace talks would have been rejected, that the Allies would have insisted on full occupation and justice. Still, some outcomes would likely have changed. The war might have ended months earlier. Entire cities, Dresden, Berlin, Tokyo, Hiroshima, might have been spared their fate. Millions of German and Allied soldiers, not to mention civilians, might have lived. There's also a deeper, moral dimension. Had Hitler been killed by his own officers, it would have sent a powerful message to the world that not all Germans were Nazis, and that honor and conscience could triumph, even in a regime of terror. Post-war German identity and Europe's recovery might have followed a very different trajectory. Scenario 3. Hitler is assassinated before 1933. Perhaps the most tantalizing what-if is the possibility that Hitler never rises to power at all. There were plots against him in the early 1920s, 1930s. What if one of those attempts, or even just political failure, had stopped him before he seized control? Without Hitler, the Nazi Party might have faded into obscurity. Germany could have remained a fragile democracy, or turned to a different authoritarian regime. Perhaps one more nationalist, less genocidal. Or perhaps civil war would have broken out, with communists and right-wing militias tearing the country apart. And beyond Germany, what of the world? No Hitler means no World War II as we know it. No Holocaust, no atomic bombings in Japan, no Cold War born from the ruins of post-war Europe. The Soviet Union might have risen unchecked, or the British and French empires might have lingered longer. Israel, the United Nations, NATO, none of these institutions might exist in their current form, but perhaps most importantly, without the horrors of Hitler's regime. The world might not have come together to define universal human rights, to outlaw genocide, to say, never again. The danger of a myth in considering these alternate histories. There's also a danger. The mythologizing of assassination as a cure for evil. Killing one man does not automatically fix a broken system. Hitler was a symbol, yes, but he was also the product of a shattered Germany, a failed peace, global depression, and deep-rooted bigotry. Even if he had been killed, many of the men around him, Göring, Himmler, Goebbels, were equally ruthless. The machinery of war and genocide might have continued under a different name, with a different face. Assassination is not revolution. It is only one act, And history is rarely changed by one act alone. The real legacy, what these 42 failed attempts truly show, is not just the persistence of fate, but the bravery of resistance. Men like Elsa and Stauffenberg knew they would probably fail, but they tried anyway, because for them, it was not just about winning. It was about standing up against a nightmare, about reclaiming a sliver of humanity in an inhuman time. So what if Hitler had been killed? We can imagine, we can dream, we can grieve what was, and wonder what might have been. But we can also remember those who tried, and through their failure, still managed to remind the world that evil is never truly untouchable. In the end, Adolf Hitler died, not by the hand of justice, not in the flames of righteous rebellion, but by his own hand, in a dark and crumbling bunker beneath a ruined Berlin. The man who had escaped death 42 times, through sheer luck, obsessive paranoia, and a fortress of lies, ultimately chose to die on his own terms. And that, perhaps, is the cruelest twist of all, because for those who tried to stop him, the brave souls who risked everything to kill a tyrant, there was no closure, no justice, only failure, imprisonment, torture, and death. Men like Georg Elsa, who worked alone for months to save millions. Men like Claus von Stauffenberg, who sacrificed everything for a better Germany. And many others, whose names history has nearly forgotten. Their stories remind us of something deeply uncomfortable. That evil is not always defeated by virtue alone. That courage does not always lead to triumph. And that sometimes history is shaped not by what did happen, but by what almost happened. Had even one of those 42 attempts succeeded, millions of lives might have been spared. The Holocaust might have ended before it began. The war might have taken a different turn. Europe and the world might have been rewritten. But history doesn't deal in what-ifs. It deals in consequences. What remains are lessons about the danger of unchecked power, about the cost of silence and complicity, and about the courage it takes to resist, even when resistance seems futile. So the next time someone asks, "Why didn't anyone try to stop Hitler?" you'll know the truth. They tried many times, and though they failed, their defiance still echoes through the corridors of history. A reminder that even in the darkest times, there are always those willing to light a match. Thank you for watching. If you found this story moving, disturbing, or thought-provoking, share it. History only lives on if we remember it, and sometimes remembering is an act of resistance in itself.